Honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to the IFF Hong Kong Conference cum inauguration ceremony of the IFF Hong Kong Center. This event is organized by the International Financial Forum, hosted by the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, and supported by the Hong Kong Academy of Finance. I am KC Kwok, the CEO of the Academy of Finance, and your MC today. The IFF is an international non-profit and non-governmental organization founded in Beijing in October 2003, under the auspices of leaders from leading advanced and emerging market economies, as well as major international organizations such as the UN, the World Bank, and the IMF. The IFF is a long-standing high-level platform for dialogue and a research network in the field of international finance and sustainable development. It has also been regarded as playing a key role in Finance 20. Let's watch an introductory video on the International Finance Forum.
作为独立的国际学术智库，国际金融论坛见证了世界经济和金融的跌宕起伏和巨大变化，并伴随世界的发展逐步成长为有一定影响力的国际智库。国际金融论坛的创建和发展得到了200多位全球财经政要领袖的参与和支持，并且和50多个国家和地区、50多个国际和地区组织建立了合作的伙伴关系。
借助国际金融论坛这个平台，广交朋友、广泛交流，深入探讨全球面临的挑战与机遇，共同寻求合作发展之路。
Financing is critical. We must mobilize public and private finance to champion social and environmental change. It is encouraged to see this starting to happen.
国际金融论坛选择永久落户广州，对广东更好地参与国际金融合作发展，在更高层次上推进改革开放，具有重要的意义。
国际金融论坛共同探讨世界大湾区的建设，为区域发展提取新动力，促成新增长，打造新格局。
国际金融论坛积极地响应国家战略，落户大湾区，建设具有标志意义的国际金融论坛永久会址，成为粤港澳大湾区国际交往的一个合作平台，共建粤港澳大湾区国际金融枢纽平台。
China and all the friends present here, we must join forces to build a fair, balanced, sustainable and stable world.
I particularly refer to mainland China, will lead the world in the future of science, technological development, manufacturing and sales of products.
We must all call upon all countries to rectify the present trajectory of dismissal of the multilateral system.
The presence here today of some of world's most eminent policymakers and prominent thinkers is a testament to the importance of this annual meeting.
It is quite critical that a sophisticated forum such as this plays a role in direct financial diplomacy.
It's a very important international institution, an independent think tank based here in China.
We need to really connect One Belt, One Road and the initiatives being taken by China with the International Finance Forum, the IFF.
New capital, new values, new work. And I have to say that never such a dedication to the new global economy and global finance has been so appropriate.
As an international financial forum coming up with leading ideas that will help stabilize and revitalize the financial infrastructure worldwide.
To fulfill those heavy duties and responsibilities.
China has indeed shown the world that rapid economic growth and modernization is possible.
IFF is such an important international forum to which I'm deeply attached. Never have global governance and international cooperation been so important as they are today. The world has no choice but to work as one if we have to overcome the immense challenges that confront us.
国际金融论坛日益发挥着非官方G20的作用，成为全球金融领域的 F20。
If we need an F20 to complement the G20, and I think we do.
The IMF and the IFF are connected by our global perspective and by fostering financial stability and sustainable growth.
The IFF has demonstrated its deep commitment to providing a platform for the international community to investigate the new globalization era.
I firmly believe that ministers of finance, the G20, and especially all of you, the newly designated F20, must become much more engaged in fighting this and future pandemics.
Greetings, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today to help launch our Green Finance Working Group. And we cannot be prouder to be joining forces with the IFF and our other partners to bring this initiative to life.
I commend your valuable contributions to global policy dialogues. So the theme of this conference, F20 Initiative, Reshape the Essence of Finance, is very timely.
Mr. John Casey Lee, Chief Executive of the Hong Kong SAR of the People's Republic of China, has conveyed his apologies for not being able to attend today's event. Nevertheless, Mr. Lee sends his congratulations and best wishes to the conference. Let's now watch the video remarks from Mr. Lee.
Mr. Han Seung-soo, Mr. Eddie Yu, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to have this opportunity to welcome such an impressive lineup of distinguished speakers and guests, including not just one, but several former heads of government, senior government officials, heavyweight business leaders, and renowned scholars. I'm grateful to the International Finance Forum for choosing Hong Kong in hosting this high-level global conference, and more significantly, in launching its Hong Kong Center on the forum's 20th anniversary. As a premier international financial center and an irreplaceable connection between the mainland and the rest of the world, Hong Kong is the ideal base to further the IFF's mission to promote international dialogue and multilateral cooperation in the financial realm. The work that the IFF is doing is more important than ever, as the global enthusiasm for strategic competition intensifies. In the face of increasingly complicated challenges, the world needs more communication and collaboration. Under the unique one country, two systems principle, Hong Kong is bestowed with the unparalleled advantage of having strong national support while being connected to the rest of the world. In his important speech at the first session of the 14th National People's Congress in March, President Xi Jinping said that we should solidly promote the practice of one country, two systems. Hong Kong's enviable status as the only place in the world where the global advantage and the China advantage converge in a single city is here to stay. As a dynamic and highly competitive global financial center, Hong Kong remains a strong supporter of multilateralism and global economic cooperation. We don't just talk the talk, we also walk the walk. The Hong Kong SAR government has been proactively reaching out to our international partners on various fronts. Over the last few months, my colleagues and I have led by example by traveling to the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Europe to strengthen ties and seek partnership opportunities. Just over a month ago, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority hosted the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision's first physical meeting outside of Basel since the pandemic, underlying our contribution to maintaining global financial stability. Meanwhile, Hong Kong is striving for early accession to the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, a free trade agreement in the Asia-Pacific region. It is now the world's largest free trade agreement, and Hong Kong is committed to promoting regional economic integration through RCEP. In the era of strategic competition, we must be proactive, be the first mover, and be prepared for the evolving macro environment. Under the result-oriented approach that I have adopted, the Hong Kong SAR government is sparing no efforts to pursue high-quality development. We have been developing new engines for growth, including proactively attracting strategic enterprises and top talents to Hong Kong, diversifying our financial market by focusing on Web3 and green and sustainable finance, and developing and budding industries of innovation, technology, arts, and culture. We will also continue to integrate into the national development, particularly the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau, Greater Bay Area development, and deepen economic and cultural ties with economies under our country's Belt and Road Initiative and beyond. Ladies and gentlemen, as one of the world's most open economies, multilateralism and globalization form part of Hong Kong's DNA. In the era of strategic competition, the Pearl of the Orient will shine even brighter because, after all, Hong Kong's success is based on our versatility and resilience. On that note, I wish this conference a great success and wish you all the best of business. Thank you.
We thank Mr. Lee for his kind words and support for the conference. May I now invite Dr. Han Seung-soo, IFF co-chairman, chair of the Council of Presidents of the UN General Assembly, and former Prime Minister of the Republic of Korea, to come onto the stage to deliver his opening remarks. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Han.
Mr. Lee has just spoken to us, but I have to say that Honorable Mr. Lee Ka-chiu, Chief Executive, Honorable Mr. Chan Mo-po, Financial Secretary, members of the International Finance Forum, ladies and gentlemen. I am very pleased to open the International Finance Forum and Hong Kong Monetary Authority joint high-level conference here in Hong Kong. The pleasure is doubled because this is the first in-person conference of the International Finance Forum in more than 3 years. The COVID-19 has wrought havoc not only to the IFF's regular activities, but with much of our daily lives during the pandemic. Over 680 million people were infected globally, and over 6.8 million people lost their lives due to this unprecedented pandemic. It will take a long time for us to completely recover from this tragedy, but at the same time, we have learned many valuable lessons from this pandemic. We must reflect on mistakes made in responding to COVID-19 pandemic so that they are never repeated. It is the first time that the International Finance Forum is hosting its international conference in Hong Kong. Since it was founded in 2003, International Finance Forum continued to hold all of its conference meetings in mainland China. I am sure that today's conference, therefore, will herald a new chapter in the history of IFF to start a closer relationship with Hong Kong, the regional center of global financial institutions. Ladies and gentlemen, multilateralism and globalization have been the backbone of the peace and prosperity during the post-war period. The United Nations and the World Trade Organization have played important roles in promoting peace, development, human rights, and free trade in the globalizing world. However, we are today at a very critical juncture in human history, experiencing a rapidly weakening trend of multilateralization and globalization. The United Nations are divided over Ukraine, and the World Trade Organization has lost functioning properly for several years by now. Since the global financial crisis of 2008, the speed of multilateralism has begun to slow down, resulting in the coining even of a new word, globalization, by the Economist of London in 2019. If we are too slow in our response, stabilization may give way even to deglobalization. Unfortunately, we are meeting at a time when the global economy is forecast a slower growth, with the growth momentum being lost. There is a similarity in economic crisis between now and the global financial crisis of 2008. At the time, the world leaders facing the unprecedented crisis due to the collapse of Lehman Brothers were united collectively to deal with the global financial crisis. The shining outcome of the cooperation was the creation of Group of 20. Since then, the leaders of G20 have been meeting every year to cooperate on various global issues. However, unfortunately, it is different this time from that time. The international divide between major powers and the war in Ukraine has divided the world into two diametrically and strategically opposed camps where the reconciliation does not seem to be an easy task. Ladies and gentlemen, another major difference between then and now is the rapid development of internet and digital technology. Now, such areas as big data, blockchain, AI, robotics, IoT, 3D printing, and even biotech are rapidly changing human society as well as the world economy. The critical appearance of ChatGPT a few months ago is bound to accelerate this process further. The first and second industrial revolution of the 18th and 19th century were the causes that divided countries into advanced and underdeveloped countries at the time. China was until then the largest economy in the world, accounting for about 30% of the global economy, while the whole of Europe, including Britain, account for only about 20%. Therefore, one of the main reasons why China had to historically suffer was because it was very slow in technological innovation and industrial transformation, foregoing the benefits from the first and second industrial revolution. This historical experience implies that were we to promote the harmonious development of the world and eventually of the global peace, we would have to do our best to spread the benefit of the third and fourth industrial revolution more effectively and evenly among nations. This means that narrowing digital divide among nations as well as people is very crucial for the future of the prosperous world. When I served as president of the 56th session of the United Nations General Assembly during 2001 and 2002, I took the narrowing the digital gap between the nations as one of the major tasks during my presidency. I even hosted a two-day UN plenary session on digital divide, and that was 22 years ago. However, this gap is not easily disappearing. The internet users account for 23% of world population in 2008, of which 61% was from developed countries, while developing countries account for 14%, and the least developed countries for only 3%. By 2021, the global share increased to 63%, while 90% in developed countries were users. The share of developing countries was 57%, and that of the least developing countries was still only 27%. The sophistication of digital technology has immense global strategical implications. Therefore, the fact that China and the United States, two most digitally advanced countries in the world, are now in deep strategic competition is no coincidence. Ladies and gentlemen, Hong Kong has played this role as the main regional center for global financial institutions for many years. The Great Bay Area is to emerge as the future financial and digital hub of the region in due course. As two critical issues facing humanity today are climate change and digitalization, Hong Kong and the Great Bay Area have much to do in order to help ameliorate the problems that may arise from these two issues. It implies that green financing and digitalization of finance would have to become the main policy concern for Hong Kong now and for the Great Bay Area later. During today's IFF Hong Kong Monetary Authority Joint Conference, I hope that we will discuss in depth the multilateralism and globalization, as well as the roles and adaptation of Asia, Hong Kong, and the Great Bay Area in this rapidly transforming geopolitical and digital world environment. I wish all of you all the best for your active participation. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you, Dr. Han, for your insightful remarks. May I now invite Mr. Paul Chen, Financial Secretary of the Government of the Hong Kong SAR of the People's Republic of China, to come on to the stage to deliver his remarks. Let's welcome Mr. Chen.
Your Excellency Dr. Seung-soo, Your Excellency Ms. Rousseff, Your Excellency Dame Shipley, distinguished speakers and guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon to you all, and welcome to Hong Kong. We are honored to have you joining us for today's high-level conference, organized by the International Finance Forum, hosted by the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, and supported by the Hong Kong Academy of Finance. I'm pleased to note that the formal opening of the IFF Hong Kong Center will take place in just a few minutes. It will be only the second IFF Center outside the mainland, following the recent opening of a representative office in Washington, D.C. The IFF, established back in 2003 by more than 20 countries, regions, and international organizations, is a high-level platform for dialogue and multilateral cooperation in the field of global finance. Today's theme, multilateralism and globalization in an era of strategic competition and implications for Asia, underlines that important commitment. So too does the launching of the IFF Hong Kong Center, which will take responsibility for the international affairs on behalf of IFF. It is true that the international economy is beset with unprecedented risks and uncertainties. Global growth is expected to slow down this year with substantial risks of hard landing. High interest rates continue to weigh on business activities. Inflation, while easing, remains stubbornly high. The effect of recent banking crisis in the US and Europe, with lingering impact, has heightened the concerns surrounding an already complicated economic environment. Given the fragile state of the global economy, it is critical that we work together. And yet, some policymakers have turned to protectionism, putting in place barriers to trade, capital flow, investment, and technology transfers. They seem to view that the international order is one that is based on zero-game competition. Such narrow-minded thinking is profoundly reshaping global economic activities, shifting trade and supply chains that tie to geopolitical blocks. Such notions as onshoring, friendshoring, or nearshoring are dominating discussions among the international business community and academia. Financial flows, foreign direct investments, and supply chain may become more fragmented as a result. That could well mean the hindering of cross-border capital flows, a reduction in international financing options and risk sharing. Individual countries may lose diversity in funding sources, leading to higher financing costs and more fragmented liquidity. No one will benefit in such a global economic environment. So you may ask, what is the perspective of Hong Kong on the prevailing global trend? What are we going to do in face of such a challenging global environment? Our answer lies with what our nation, China, has reiterated in the recent high-level meetings in Beijing. As President Xi said, and if I may quote, we must strive to promote the building of a community with a shared future for mankind. Deeply engraved in the spirit of a shared future are peace, development, cooperation, and mutual benefit. Indeed, at a time when the world is undergoing rapid changes unseen in a century, the world needs more inclusive and resilient development from which people can benefit. That is why our country is committed to high-level two-way opening up and practice true multilateralism. The Belt and Road Initiative is a clear and compelling illustration of multilateralism in action. Launched by President Xi 10 years ago, the Belt and Road Initiative upholds the principles of extensive consultation, collaboration, and shared benefits. It has made substantial contribution to participating countries and economies. the China-Euro Express Railway, for example, has provided an alternative land route between the continents of Asia and Europe, unleashing the economic potential of Eurasia and Central Asia. And in Indonesia, track laying of the Jakarta-Bandung high-speed railway was recently completed. This landmark project, I'm pleased to report, is scheduled for full operation this year. Our country remains committed to this visionary international collaboration initiative. Last year, China's Belt and Road non-financial outbound direct investment reached $21 billion, up by 3.3%, despite an extremely challenging economic environment. And the annual trade volume between China and Belt and Road countries has doubled from around $1 trillion in 2013 to more than $2 trillion in 2022. That is an average growth rate of about 9%. Thanks to the one country, two systems principle, Hong Kong is in a unique position with unparalleled advantages to connect the mainland and the rest of the world. Hong Kong is firmly committed to free trade, to reducing trade barriers and ensuring the free flow of capital, goods, and talents. As a founding member of the World Trade Organization, Hong Kong is a staunch supporter of the rule-based multilateral trading system with WTO at its core. In this regard, we are keen to see the WTO restore a well-functioning dispute settlement system accessible to all members. As the world progresses towards carbon neutrality and set priorities for ESG, there is much Hong Kong can offer in green finance. Estimates have shown that the green financing gaps in Asia alone in the next 3 decades amounting to $66 trillion. Huge, right? Hong Kong is a green financing hub. Last year, the green debts issued or arranged in Hong Kong exceeded $80 billion. In terms of the amount of green bond issued, we rank #1 in Asia. But among aside, Hong Kong also excels in setting benchmarks and experimenting new frontiers. For instance, we were the first Asian government to issue 30-year and 20-year green bonds denominated in US dollar and euro respectively. We also issued the first ever government tokenized green bond in February this year. This recent issuance showcased our ability to combine the bond market, green and sustainable finance, and fintech in one promising prospect. At the same time, Hong Kong and our sister cities in the Greater Bay Area are also home to a burgeoning cluster of green tech companies. Their work ranges from environmental engineering and carbon sequestration to energy reduction. Many of them, in fact, are already finding international markets for their offerings. We envisage that Hong Kong and the GBA together will host a complete, vibrant green industry and financing chain, serving the needs of the region and the world. ladies and gentlemen, to make all our contributions worth the while, we need fruitful dialogue, wide-ranging communication from region to region, nation to nation, government to government. The IFF was exactly created to promote the strategic dialogue and candid communication the world needs. It was established to stimulate research and innovation, think tank building, and talent training that are so essential to global finance and its long-term process. Hong Kong is pleased to be able to play a role in this meaningful undertaking, honored to be part of the IFF and its inclusive global mission. We look forward to working closely with IFF to advance comprehensive and sustainable economic development for all. And for our guests traveling from afar, please do spend extra days in Hong Kong. Visit our cultural infrastructures, the Paris Museum, the Contemporary Arts Museum in West Kowloon. And also don't forget, take some time to try some of the 200 Michelin restaurants in Hong Kong. Last but not least, may I wish you a very successful forum and the best of health and business. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chen, for your very welcoming opening remarks. We are now going to have the inauguration ceremony of the IFF Hong Kong Center very soon. This year marks the 20th anniversary of the IFF. And the IFF is launching its Hong Kong Center at this special moment to further strengthen the global network in promoting green growth and sustainable development, as well as enhancing comprehensive multilateral cooperation in the digital economy and technology innovation. The IFF Hong Kong Center will play its full role of building a new international communication platform for mainland China and Hong Kong. Let us now witness the unveiling of the plaque of the IFF Hong Kong Center. May I invite the officiating guests to come on stage. They are Dr. Seung-soo, IFF co-chairman, chair of the Council of Presidents of UN General Assembly and former Prime Minister of the Republic of Korea. Mr. Paul Chen, financial secretary. Dame Janie Shipley, IFF board member and former Prime Minister of New Zealand. Mr. Eddie Yu, Chief Executive of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. Mr. Lin Jianhai, IFF Vice President and Director of IFF Global Center. Mr. Antony Leung, IFF Vice President and Group Chairman of Fung Group. On the count of 3, can I invite the officiating guests to unveil the plaque? 3, 2, 1. Please stay on stage for some photos. Thank you. Please be seated. The IFF sets up global centers or liaison offices in major international financial centers to foster the F20 global network and fulfill its internationalization strategy. Since the establishment of its southern headquarters in the Greater Bay Area in 2017, the IFF has been committed to making contributions to the region's development as an international financial hub. May I now invite the speakers of the conference today to join us on stage for a group photo. Let us welcome Dr. Seung-soo, Mr. Paul Chen, Dame Janie Shipley, Madame Dilma Rousseff, Mr. Eddie Yu, Mr. Lai Ji-hong, Mr. Xu Weigang, Mr. Antony Leung, Mr. Siddharth Tiwari, Professor Harold James, Ms. Li Tong, Mr. Lin Jianhai, Mr. Zhang Jizhong, Mr. Qiu Yitong, Professor Song Ming, and Mr. Lin Shaoli. Thank you. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed to the first session of the conference under the theme Multilateralism and Globalization in an Era of Strategic Competition. May I invite, sorry, I'll wait for them to get all the things ready first. May I now invite the moderator, Dr. Siddharth Tiwari, IFF Vice President, former Chief Representative for Asia and Pacific of the BIS, and other speakers onto the stage. They are Dr. Seung-soo, Madame Dilma Rousseff, Dame Janie Shipley, Professor Harold James, and Mr. Antony Leung.
There is a lot.
Go there. Yeah.
Thank you, Casey. I was thinking before I came here that if ever there's a panel that needs no introduction, it has to be this one. With everyone on stage being a global thinker, a public figure. So with that, the introductions will be very short. We have Prime Minister Han, the former Prime Minister of Korea. You've held several important assignments, both in Korea and United Nations. You were a UN Secretary General's Special Envoy on many issues, President of the 56th session of the General Assembly, and in 2001, you accepted the Nobel Peace Prize for the United Nations. President Rousseff, you've been the 36th President of Brazil, an illustrious career with a leader for the Global South. 36 has a ring here, with Dame Shipley being the 36th Prime Minister of New Zealand, the first woman to get that position, and with several key assignments and a deep interest, I should say, in China over the years. To my left, Harold James, preeminent historian of at least my generation, with a focus on international architecture and globalization, and may I say, the current official historian of the IMF. And right at the end, Antony Leung, who's known well in Hong Kong, former financial secretary, group chairman and CEO of the Fung group, and extensive experience in finance. There are two sessions today. The first one is Multilateralism and Globalization in the Era of Strategic Competition. And the second session is what it means for Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area. So we look back first and ask ourselves that over the last 4 decades, the world experienced a period of massive growth fueled by the expansion of globalization in goods, in services, information flows, and people-to-people exchanges over time. And it's not the case that there wasn't any serious financial crisis. You can go back from the Asian crisis to those in Latin America, to United States, to Europe. But the global community found a way to solve this crisis together. However, much of this has changed in the last few years, given the geopolitical fragmentation that has happened. So the first question as we look back is, what went wrong? Could the breakdown have been stemmed in its infancy? And if so, how? And the same question is to the 5 panelists. I start with you, Prime Minister Han.
Me?
Yep.
Well, thank you very much. I think what is happening today in the world is changing nature of international political power configuration and the subsequent economic consequences. The geopolitical fragmentation has been intensifying over the years. No one, however, will deny that the world has benefited greatly from the post-war period when the US remained as the only major dominant power of the world. Multilateralism and globalization were the hallmark of the world at the time. The United Nations, World Trade Organization, and international financial institutions born of Bretton Woods conference all contributed to the post-war development and prosperity. However, the weakness of the post-war international framework have increasingly become apparent as other major powers began to appear on the scene. In this case, China's rise has been particularly notable. By 2010, China became the second largest economy in the world after the United States. By 2025, it is predicted that Chinese economy is to overcome US economy. The geopolitical fragmentation is affecting the US-China economic relationship. And most of this has been the top news material for several months in the past. However, there are also people who express their concern on the current state of affairs. For example, about a week or so ago, Janet Yellen, US Secretary of Treasury, expressed the view that economic decoupling is rising, and we should work harder to cooperate together in protecting countries from this decoupling. Thank you.
Thank you. The same question to President Rousseff. From Brazil to China, you've had a unique view of the challenges. What went wrong, and could we have stopped it?
A globalização começa a se fragilizar a partir da crise de 2008-2009, quando ficou evidente.
Globalization began to weaken after the crisis of 2008 and 2009, when the disastrous consequences of the dysregulation of international finance became evident. The measures taken to overcome the crisis were insufficient and did not avoid the problems that followed. Global value chains, as another pillar of globalization, were growing at a faster rate than the other components of the GDP before the crisis, but have slowed down after the crisis. This turndown was followed by a rapid recovery in 2010 and 2011, and since then, with the exception of 2017, global value chains have grown at a slower rate than global GDP growth. This has underestimated the globalization itself, but of course, COVID-19, geopolitical conflicts, and sanctions have greatly accentuated the reduction in the growth of global value chains, fragmenting the network and shifting expansions to regional markets. The most important commodity market, a new commercial and financial hub is being created, the petrol oil. China is now buying oil from Saudi Arabia in RMB. This means the creation of an energy market as an alternative to dollar. Now, the recent blocking of resources has generated uncertainty and created distrust about the protection of financial assets in dollars. These forces both reduce deglobalization and promote a trend toward a new kind of re-globalization. The visible failures of international coordination have generated further fragmentation. The United Nations has not been able to keep up with the growth of geopolitical tensions, nor have the so-called Bretton Woods institutions been able to reverse the movement towards geo-economic fragmentation. The world economy is going through a moment of great uncertainty due to the effects of high inflation and monetary policies that lead to the increase of interest rate, producing bank failures, excessive leverage, increasing the risk of recession in developed countries, intensifying the volatility in the credit, currency, and capital markets. The end of quantitative easing and adoption of quantitative tightening is producing, especially in the US, a strong pressure on the system of medium banks, beginning with SVB and now falling on the First Republic. Whether or not this results in a credit crunch remains to be seen. Developing countries in general suffer the consequences of these policies by being mere passive subjects of international crisis. However, the greatest threat to the current situation of globalization is the attempt to contain China by means of decoupling policy. Both the protectionist policy of unilateral increases in tariffs expressed in the Make America Great Again and the Chips and Science Art, which aims at blocking China's production chain, deepen the globalization pattern in force until then, and produce the search for a new pattern. As for the increase in the pie, a perverse novelty lies in the emergence of significant concentration of income and wealth with developed countries, since in developing countries poverty, misery, and hunger have been a present tragedy. The industrial novelty to be welcomed is the removal of 800 million people from the misery by China. We need a new coloration of forces, multilateral and multipolar, to replace the unipolar world that has entered into crisis. We are in the transition between a new world that has not yet fully emerged and an old world that has not yet fully disappeared. O Sr. Harold, o que aconteceu sobre... Estou muito contente.
So much. We've got two slogans on the board, globalization and multilateralism. And there's often a sense that they're in crisis today, and we've just heard that. But I think I would like to redefine that a little bit, because it doesn't seem to me that globalization is really in crisis, but it does seem to me that multilateralism is having great difficulties at the moment. Globalization, I don't believe that there are many countries in the world that really want to deglobalize. And I think you can see, if you just look at the data, that, for instance, if you think even of the China-US relationship, that trade has been expanding over the last couple of years, that the share of trade in China's GDP has been rising. So there are, I think, some countries that might be on the fringe of this globalization. I don't think there's much globalization in Cuba. I think Russia is actively trying to deglobalize, but I don't believe that other countries are. Multilateralism, on the other hand, really is in crisis. And we've had that discussed, I think, in the course of this afternoon, that the WTO is stalling, that the Bretton Woods institutions have a really major challenge. But what gives me comfort in this is thinking back on a long historical picture, and that's what Siddharth asked me to think about. So I look at previous moments, and when this went wrong, when it went wrong, I think is, as President Rousseff said, with the global financial crisis and with the pandemic. So these are big challenges, but the world had exactly these challenges in the past, and in particular, supply shortages, supply chain issues. So the modern globalization began in the middle of the 19th century as a response to an amazing episode of hunger in Europe, and Europe then came to the sense that it couldn't solve that hunger crisis on its own. It needed to trade with the rest of the world. It needed to get food from elsewhere. I obviously don't remember that, but I remember the 1970s. I grew up in the 1970s, went to the university in the 1970s. And that was also a moment of big supply shortages. And people at first thought that they should better turn inwards in order to deal with the supply shortages and the shortages of oil. And then by the end of the 1970s, there was a very different insight, that it was actually opening up that did it. And above all, I think the big leader in this regard was in China in 1979 with Deng Xiaoping. So previous episodes of shortage actually created more globalization, but a globalization of a different kind. And that's exactly what I believe that we're doing, thanks in part to technology that rapidly developed in the course of the response to the pandemic in particular. Medical technology, communications technology, IT, AI. We're seeing really, really transformative developments, and all of those are going to tie the world together. And I think if you think about this, that you can think of a world that's speaking to each other in many, many different ways, in the way that we can on this platform, with translation, with interpretation. And we have a world, I think, in which we have one world, but many systems. And that might be a good way of thinking about how globalization should develop.
Thank you. Mr. Leung, no small economy, and especially an island economy, can withstand the winds of change. Hong Kong is one of them. And so from your perspective, as you look back, was there a radical shift, and should we have caught it earlier?
Well, thank you, Chairman. I agree with Professor James that globalization is not at risk. If anything, if we contrast with the era of the Cold War, the world was not as integrated or interdependent as today. I've seen research by numerous firms that actually no continent can be self-sufficient by itself. So this is something that we really have to recognize, and plus the fact that with internet and all, the world is very much interconnected. So globalization is not quite at risk, but what is at risk is really an existing power who has been dominating the world for the last several decades, with only 4% of the population, but enjoying more than 25% of various kinds of resources, is seen a threat by an emerging power. And over the last 500 years, we have seen such so-called rivalry happening. And there's a book by a famous author on the so-called Thucydides trap, that the existing power usually would rival with the emerging power. And unfortunately, out of the 16 times of happening, 12 has ended up in hot war. Now, obviously, hopefully this time will be different. And the difference is we all know that if there is indeed a hot war, the world is going to be destroyed. And hopefully the leaders of the world would have such foresight. And also not even counting the Armageddon consequence, there are many other issues that needs a lot of cooperation to deal with. There are still people kind of very much underdeveloped in some parts of the world, the weather issues, and then obviously that we discuss in our pre-meeting rooms, now the challenge of generative AI. We need kind of somehow active dialogue to see how we can prevent some of the bad things from happening. As far as Hong Kong is concerned, now Hong Kong, I kind of take the professor's notion that the world is going to be one country, many systems. Obviously, here are one world, many systems. In Hong Kong, we are one country, two systems. But I see the world as mainly going to be one world having two systems, meaning the US and the Western system, and the rest of the world, in a way, with China leading the way. Hong Kong sits right in the middle. We have, as our nation, China, an emerging economy, and we were trading with the rest of the world. Hong Kong is the most open economy in the world, ranked by the World Economic Forum for about 2 decades. So clearly we feel the winds, but hopefully Hong Kong can also play the role in bridging the two systems. Meaning, as I said in the very beginning, the world is very much interdependent. And most countries in the world would still want to trade with China. A lot of investors want to invest in China. China has, through our president, has reconfirmed many times again that we want to maintain a high quality opening up. We want to trade with the rest of the world. We want to maintain the multilateral arrangements of today. So hopefully, Hong Kong can play the role in, one, explaining to the rest of the world what China's emergence is like, and secondly, we are no threat to the rest of the world. Also, we would like to invest, or we would like investors and traders to come to Hong Kong to take a look that Hong Kong is still surviving, China is thriving. So why don't you trade with China, have a dialogue with China, maybe through Hong Kong? So we see the changes, but we hope that in the world of competing world powers, we can play a constructive role in avoiding the bad consequence of yet another Thucydides trap.
Thank you. Maybe we take a steer from Harold and focus on multilateralism and leave globalization aside for the moment and try and look ahead. We've sort of looked behind and try and look ahead. And there are two statements here. One is a fact and one is a view. The first is, for the next 75 years, the bulk of global growth will come from the global south. Any projection you look at from the IMF to other agencies, that's clearly there. The second is a view that for the foreseeable future, strategic competition will dominate. If these two are true, what kind of multilateralism can coexist with strategic competition, and what kind of choices the global south would need to make or would need to avoid to make this possible? Prime Minister Han.
Can I just comment
on
the first question?
Yeah.
You missed me out. I'm not sure if
I'm sorry.
If you intended. Just briefly, of the things that have been already said, I won't repeat. But I don't believe that they could have been avoided. As has been made clear in the period of 4 decades that we're really reviewing, the world population doubled, and China's economic growth during that period, if you take 2015 price figures, multiplied by 32 times, to $32 trillion from $2.7 trillion. These are mega trends of undeniable consequence. One of the things that I do think has been missed, and it's a challenge going forward, is whether or not the global media and also strategic media outlets of institutions and organization and the financial infrastructure and so on shared their knowledge and insights of the megatrends as they were going. As a politician, it's very clear to me that where people have some insight and understanding, they will go along with that. You often see irrational behavior where people have a lack of knowledge and respond. And so coming to this strategic question, where we've got caught with a sudden, well, actually a very progressive China rising. And it's not only a question of China and the US. Many of our economies now are connected to both. If you look at the major 20 economies of the world, both of them are trading massively with the US and China. Small economies like New Zealand, from where I came from, and it was also true halfway through that phase of development, many economies thought they could survive by insular and protected behavior. And in fact, much of what changed in the periods of the late 80s and 90s was a realization that you couldn't survive. All you did was ran up massive debts, you got disconnected, and in fact, the cost of living through protectionism impacted on your own people. Like China, New Zealand, many of the economies and most of the continents went through a reform period of opening up. In my opinion, it wasn't only China's opening up, although that was a huge factor. There was a huge reform appetite to move away from protection, to give people the benefits of buying and selling or purchasing and receiving goods on the open market that became critical. What we have now is this realization that we now have two huge mega groups competing and many, many aligned, historically aligned economies now interconnected. Historically, alliances were alliances and could be relied on to remain separate. In my opinion, the changes of the last 40 years have complicated this in the areas of foreign policy, trade policy, and defence. And while we could spend a lot of time arguing where people should spend their money, in my opinion, it's perfectly natural, for example, that a huge emerging economy will invest in securing its interests. Every economy over 4 centuries has done that. We shouldn't be surprised. But what we mustn't encourage is militarization to create tensions that then lead to what have historically been other catastrophic disasters. So we're poised in this moment. I don't think we should attempt to look back, but I do think we should learn the lessons of history and also at this moment understand how quickly change can accelerate. My colleague's reference to AI, I think, is going to dramatically alter the framework further. Many economies reliant on the services sector, in my opinion, are very much more likely to be more heavily impacted by advanced AI techniques than production. Now, whether that pans out to be true or not is yet to be seen. But while we're discussing a former megatrend that has got us to this point, I think strategic pressures will be exacerbated by the impact that AI will again throw across, both in terms of changing the old experience of the successful, but actually unleashing the potential of those who have historically been isolated. And the question of whether the financial sector, the geopolitical sector, and the multilateral trade system can be agile enough to move quickly to be able to be part of this transformation, or whether it will relegate itself to history simply because it didn't have the wit to do so. I've been worried for many years about multilateralism's ability to migrate. We're in a pivotal moment as to whether the institutions will fall forward and succeed, or indeed some, if not all, will fall back. I don't think all will fail, but it's a fascinating moment that we live in.
So maybe just build on that a little bit. It is true that what you said, that the process of globalization led to more responsible policy making around the world. Institutions strengthened, markets strengthened, everything strengthened and maybe connected to the second question, and I'll come to AI at the end because it's a topic that's worth a few days of discussion. But if we look forward, what kind of multilateralism can succeed, and what is the responsibility of the Global South to make it succeed? And I start with you, Dame Shipley.
Goodness me. Well, most of the world's humanity lives in what we call the Global South. I think it's 85% or thereabouts of our people. And what we've learned in the last 40 years is if people are connected to markets and markets to people, people's lives improve. China is probably the most magnificent example that you could find, but many economies connected to China have had that benefit as Belt and Road and other initiatives had flowed through. And there are examples in other parts of the world, but it's extremely obvious here that this South opportunity exists. What needs to change? Well, can I make a somewhat political statement? I think that the North-South issue has a rather patronizing narrative, which needs to change. I mean, I don't know why. Well, I do know why historically Australia and New Zealand are not rated as part of the South. And actually, it's the convenient developed economies thrive, and the developing economies who we often historically have been comfortable, and I'm summarizing here, but it's been an aid model, not an investment and emancipation model, that has often evolved in those two conversations. Now, the question of whether or not we're at a pivotal moment in history where these massive populations have the capacity to be connected. Again, I don't want to dwell on AI, but historical banking systems and financing systems and capital flows, for example, have always relied on the information and the rating agencies and others who have had their own historic procedures of deciding what risk looks like. I think that digitalization digital transformation and then digitalization, which connects capacity, has got a lot of opportunity to rip out cost and time. And again, while I'm an ex-politician, I observe that every economy that's been able to focus on productivity gains, in other words, doing more with less or more with the same, have been those who have been in the transformational space. And those who have not been able to put themselves in that mindset and skill set and forward projection are trying to defend their history rather than unlock in a meaningful way the humanity, which has huge capacity. So I, for one, for example, would love to see the Sustainable Development Goals have a digital and digitalization strategy laid over them as a development and economic emancipation tool when we're talking about North-South. I mean, why should they be locked into the historic frameworks that have allowed finance and so on? We need a circuit breaker. We need to get ourselves to a pivotal moment. And whether or not the technology environment is going to allow us to do that, or whether the institutions need to have an epiphany and be prepared to let go what has been a dominance, but a narrative that protects the dominance, as opposed to a narrative that genuinely is committed to expand the global economy and the experience of individuals. I won't go further into the complexity of cybersecurity and data. We will have to find institutions who can lead in this field, and as a female leader, I've always been very interested in the ESG idea of non-financial measurement. I think it should be ESDG. We should put digital firmly in this, because it's not just a measurement question, it's a value and ethical question, and it needs to be addressed early or we'll be suffering the consequences. So I'm optimistic, but it's complicated, and there will need to be some mindset and some pivoting in order for the South to succeed. Hong Kong, by the way, is in a perfect position. It's history with the North. It's facing within the South, like New Zealand, not necessarily counted as part of the South, but technically, geographically in the South. It has a huge capacity to lead in some of these complex fields.
Thank you. President Rousseff, you've been in the thick of this for the last few decades, leading the Global South forward. What will this new architecture be in terms of multilateralism, and what is the roles and responsibilities of the North and the South?
Eu acredito que o que permitiu os
We should improve the existing institutions and create new ones that are truly more effective and resilient, multilateral and multipolar. Moreover, it was the long years of application of policies reducing the role of the state and investments in public health systems that make it difficult to effectively confront COVID-19. Taking millions of lives, and on issue, the World Health Organization have more preventive and resolutive power. Without a doubt, we need a multilateral and multipolar alternative to the existing pattern that reduces the distance between the global North and global South, and that have greater power prevent unipolar policies that put world security at risk. For emerging economies, it is also about overcoming the condition of mere commodity suppliers. The Global South and Latin America in particular must seek new characteristics. Many countries have not been reached the third industrial and technological revolution, and now, in the face of the fourth revolution, they are threatened with becoming mere consumers of platform capitalism products, only using digital applications in their economies. Strategic in the promotion of this new, more balanced, multipolar order have multilateral platforms such as the BRIC. Strategic in promotion of this new, more balanced, multipolar order are multilateral platforms such as the BRICS Bank, the African Development Bank, the Asian Investment and Infrastructure Bank, for example. We have to participate in some way in industrial process, master remote medicine, create smart cities, develop renewable energies, and make full use of artificial intelligence, putting them at the service of people and the protection of the environment. In fact, we have to modernize, but by making our modernization centered in the included people of Global South. The current system has low capacity to take developing countries' interests into account, which have led to the adoption of modernization that produces educational, scientific, and technological development through cooperation and sharing the innovations. A green modernization that leads to an energy transition with clean energy and ensures the preservation of the environment. I want to say the importance of building a new coalition of forces centered on the construction of consensus, seeking, in fact, a community of shared information and a shared future of all humanity. And make this world more cooperative and concentrated on some of the consensus. I think one of the proposal of President Xi is very interesting, which is to set up a community of shared future of all humanities. What is the role?
Competition, particularly between the United States and China, has an immense impact on the current shape of the multilateralism. United Nations, as I said before, during the post-war period, until recently was the symbol of multilateralism and globalization. In the field of trade economy, World Trade Organization also played a very important role in furthering the benefit of free trade. Unfortunately, United Nations is divided over Ukraine, and the WHO, World Trade Organization, has not been functioning for several years by now. Frankly speaking, the cruciality of China in promoting multilateralism has increased tremendously after Russia invaded Ukraine. Unlike the period soon after the World War II, when the United Nations was created, several poor countries in South, such as India, Indonesia, Brazil, South Africa, in addition to China, have great potentiality of becoming major economic powers of the world in due course. Today, they together account for 43% of the global population, and theirs is growing at a faster rate than that of developed countries. This means that there will have to be a shake of the international organizations, particularly the United Nations, in due course, giving more responsibility and influence to these countries of South. Of course, it will take time. You cannot do it now, right now, but the fact is that it is coming and will be coming in due course. Most of these developing countries were slow in catching up, as I said in my main speech, in the first and second industrial revolution, the 18th and 19th century. The consequence of this was subjugation of sovereignty to the then developed industrial country. We have to make certain that this kind of history should not repeat again. Now China is on par with the United States in digital technology and industry. India is the main supplier of digital manpower globally, as well as the base for digital products. And I'm sure that soon South Africa, Brazil, Indonesia will be on the same course. I think, therefore, narrowing the digital divide between the two camps that developed countries, making global South to keep up in line with the global North, could make multilateralism alive in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you. Harold, you steered us in this direction. So what is your take on that?
Well, thanks. Indeed. First of all, a word on strategic competition, because I think that's one of the key difficulties that we're living with. And I believe that there are good as well as bad sides to strategic competition. So in particular, we're living in a world where technology is advancing very, very quickly. We need a lot of investment in new technologies. And one of the things that the strategic competition is doing is pushing exactly that increase in new technology and new investment. If you want a historical parallel to that, think of the Cold War. I mean, obviously, we don't want to get back to the Cold War, and the Cold War was in many ways a frightening and terrible experience. But the moment that the Soviet Union put Sputnik into the atmosphere, and it started to circulate around the world, people in the United States woke up and they thought they had to do more, and there was an immense investment program that followed. And I think you can see exactly that actually in the course of the last couple of years, and particularly in the last summer. So if you look at the Inflation Reduction Act and the approach that the IRA took to the challenges that the United States and the world faces, what the IRA does is to push investment, particularly in new technologies, but also in environmental technologies. And if you think of that, that seems to me to offer one of the solutions to something where multilateralism had really got stuck. Experts, international institutions, economists, were always thinking, if you wanted to push the world away from carbon energy, away from the dependence on carbon energy, you needed to have some kind of financial incentive, some kind of carbon tax or emissions trading scheme. But the problem was that these emissions trading schemes were very complicated, and people could invent different ones. And so there was something like 70 different emissions trading schemes going on around the world. And the United States didn't want to sign up to any of them. But what this investment program is doing is offering a complete alternative to that, in that if you push the investment in carbon-free technology, you will increase the amount of non-carbon energy being produced and decrease the price. And that's an instance where the price does what it always should do. It gives a signal. And you will find people then shifting all over the world, and the technology will be available. So in that sense, it's something that opens up to the global south as well. You will find that there will be a move to much more non-carbon energy use without the need of the multilateral institutions. And so I think it's a nice way in which technology can offer a way round an impasse in which we've got ourselves. And just one brief reflection also on what multilateralism can or should do in terms of thinking about the challenges of the future. Security is really important. And security, I think, in many ways, actually, the United Nations, and people have been worried about the United Nations, and some of the comments have been skeptical about what the UN has been doing. But if you think of the way that the General Assembly has responded to Russia's attack on Ukraine, it's an impressive demonstration of a world consensus. It's not a question of the world being split. Very, very few countries voted against the resolution condemning Russia's attack on Ukraine. So there's something good about the UN system. There's something good about the General Assembly. And if you think of then of multilateralism, where we're going to work on this, I think one of the challenges is, and it's been raised several times on the platform before, is about the management of data and the linking of different types of data. That is really one of the challenges that multilateral institutions will face, and where I think there is a case for a really urgent response. Coordinating this data on security, data on health, data on energy, data on the climate, data on financial services. We need to link all of those because those issues are really interconnected, and that, I think, is the challenge.
So, Mr. Leung, maybe to connect what Harold said in the first part of the role of strategic state industrial policy, with what you said in your first intervention, that there will likely be two spheres. If we put them together, what kind of multilateralism will prevail or can prevail?
Well, first of all, I agree with the Prime Minister that it may be difficult to avoid these large power conflict. As I said, history shows that it has been very difficult to avoid, because the existing power would not just roll over and play dead. But I think we must insist that, number one, despite the conflicts between governments, particularly these two powers, we must insist that the people should talk to each other and connect. Because if people are not talking, then it's bad. Secondly, we must embrace multilateralism, because the world is one world, and we need to resolve all kinds of issues together. And on this one, connecting with what Professor has said, we have to make full use of technology. I mean, to a certain extent, our governance, our management of the world is not really making good use of technology, or if anything, we are actually falling way behind. I mean, with internet, with the TikToks of the world, people are very much connected, and yet we are using a government structure that is not very much sometimes representing the people. They may represent kind of interest groups. So we have to think about how do we use technology. So at least there are two areas that maybe we can think about. One is somehow use technology to connect the various interest groups of the world together. So we express the opinion directly rather than through kind of elected officials. And to that extent, say, for example, IFF, together with the more enlightened think tanks around the world, we should have alliance so that we can express the view of the more informed and intelligent people to tell the world, including the governments, what we are thinking, what we should be doing around the world. And obviously, we should strengthen the existing multilateral organizations, the UNs, the WTO, WHO. I mean, some nations are not paying the dues for some years already. If they are not happy, let's listen to their voice, try to get them in. But on the other hand, we should also think about the other side, because some countries are weaponizing a lot of things, weaponizing trade, weaponizing investments, technology transfers, and that kind of thing. We should also think about even in the financial sector, now that we are in the International Finance Forum. What if a certain country decides to weaponize, say, the SWIFT? With technology, we should quickly get the South and the North together to build something around blockchains. Because with blockchain, then you avoid the weaponization of the SWIFT. I mean, I'm kind of advisor to a company that use blockchain technology to facilitate trade payments around the world, particularly with the South. So we should really empower this kind of thing. I mean, this company, Lian, I think is doing something that we should be thinking about. So we should use technology to facilitate communication, to promote better governance, to avoid the current system's weaknesses, as well as to prevent the bad things that if some country would decide to ruin the existing system, what we should be doing to prevent the bad things from happening.
Thank you. So just I am the clock. Everyone has strengths and weaknesses. My weakness is managing time. But my strength is knowing what my weakness is. So I'm going to skip over the third question and go to the audience and take questions from the audience. May I request you to identify yourself before you ask the question, and a short, pointed question, not a comment.
No questions.
Right at the back.
Thank you, Stuart James from Goldman Sachs. A number of you have, when thinking about what needs to change to fix the situation we're in, have pointed to reform of the current international institutions. But from your standpoints, what does that reform look like to make these institutions both legitimate and performing as usefully as they can?
So maybe President Rousseff, to you, because you're in the midst of this.
Uma das questões que eu acredito que foram mais importantes na década de...
In 2010 and 2009, the two critical issues facing humanity today what happened? He has fundamentally the role of financing and extreme situations that there's no as two critical issues in 2008, 2009, how to how is this absolutely involve a vision that the banks continue to suffer? I believe that it is necessary that a multilateralism is and competition, strategic competition involve systematic crisis. In the calm period, after the crisis, and they come back to solve the problem, the serious problem. What is difficult to principally according to the consensus is difficult to conquer. Every country has different situations, and the consensus is difficult to achieve. Let's see what's the consequence of that. The energy market, like the petrol, which is the worst. The 30% of the petrol like the 30% of the energy and for the situations, multilateral situations, in relation to, it is not possible to when of so what we have is focus more on the people and focus more on the multilateral and multipolar. It is very diversified for the multipolar. We are talking about a phenomenon that, because so it is important that in the countries such as Brazil, the monetary change is considered a problem. What is not, I am very worried about the issues that I talked about. We are the consumers. This means in the market and this means that the world is not in the same way that I will repeat that the strategic competition is
one more question from the audience, and then we'll move towards closing the panel. It was an impossible topic, points to the clarity of the panel. Maybe we go down 1 minute of reflection, final reflection on what you've heard and the way forward.
Thanks God.
Harold.
So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in a panel like this, we look back and we think of big mistakes. And I think part of the mistake after 2008 was not really doing enough in terms of reform of multilateral institutions. Part of the mistake after the COVID crisis was the way in which the vaccine issue was handled and the vaccine nationalism, and that, I think, discredited a lot of the vision of multilateralism. So we've got to think of ways of really learning from those lessons and thinking in particular about the way in which you can be much more nimble in mounting really management of a very, very complicated system of challenges.
President Rousseff, any final thoughts?
I think that cooperation between people is a process that is a very good process because the world is changing.
Well, I just want to thank you, our group, but also the audiences, as well as Hong Kong Monetary Authority, for organizing a very important forum today. And we hope that IFF will have a very special relationship with Hong Kong Monetary Authority in the future. And we are delighted that you hosted this. I hope they will be able to reciprocate your hospitality by inviting you to our meeting in Nansha in due course. Thank you.
Dame Shipley, final thoughts.
Look, we can still succeed with a multilateral approach. I think we agreed that globalization, while people are anxious, it hasn't been thwarted. We need to remember that multilateralism, where they are global institutions, it's still a matter of leadership. I was encouraged this week, for example, with the new appointment of the incoming lead on the World Bank. You know, a gentleman, Mr. Banga,
right.
A US-Indian background, already doing what he described as a listening tour of Africa and looking to see what would work. We also need to remember that multilateralism doesn't have to have everyone agreed in every issue. The UN runs a model where unless everyone is agreed, nothing is agreed. But there are many examples of innovation around multilateralism where small groups of countries, some small and some large, have decided to act together. And in my own experience as a small nation, the origin of the TPP or the CCP, whatever they call it now, it was the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's evolved into a world-best model of trade practice, and it can bring countries from any area that if they meet the standards which were world trade standards, they can join and collaborate. So I think that the leadership followers issue is also essential at this time. If we wait for everyone to become aligned, I think we're going to have lost a huge amount of momentum. So it's not so much reform as leadership and innovation and flexibility and agility that I think will keep multilateralism alive. Last point, we have to decouple it not from each other, but separate the concepts of what I would loosely call foreign policy from trade in some of our global discussions. Otherwise, we get bogged down. And the APEC model is a very good example where everyone agrees not to discuss geopolitical strategic competition, but rather acknowledge that that exists. And by the way, when they get together, I can tell you they're discussing nothing other than strategic competition in-house because they are together. But the focus of that alliance or multilateral group of players, large and small, China, Russia, and the US are in the room, along with tiny economies like New Zealand and some of the Pacific Islands. We can discuss things like climate, where you've got people all with a common interest, but with entirely different scale in those types of models. And I would encourage people, if they're in a mode for reform, to look at groupings like the APEC model. I'm not saying it's the only one, but in my experience, it's a highly flexible, adaptable model, which doesn't get us immediately into trouble, but can be highly progressive.
Thank you. We are in Hong Kong, and so the final word is to you, Mr. Leung. Not to summarize what we've heard, but final few words on closing the panel.
Well, I hope that everybody in this room, but everybody in the world, particularly the leaders of the great nations, would remember that this world is the only one that we have. And human history is actually not that long. I hope that all the leaders, including everybody in the room, when they think about what we do, what they do, think about one world, and then we have a shared destiny. Thank you.
Thank you. So before I hand it to Casey, a warm welcome, a warm thank you to the panel. Please join me in thanking them.
Thank you, Siddharth, and thank you all the speakers. Can I invite all the speakers to stand up for a group photo? All right, thank you. Let's take a short break. Coffee and tea will be served outside. We will start the next session in about 15 minutes. Thank you.
Achieving net zero emissions by mid-century requires urgent action now.
A transition to the new climate economy is critical to avoid widespread economic and financial disruption.